What's up guys, Captain Blade J52 here with another round of our tanking videos, and in this particular video we're going to be tackling the Vaadwaur Juggernaut. Now, this is the new R&D promo ship that released with our most recent R&D promo at the time of filming this. In fact, the promotion is still going on at the moment at the time that this was recorded. But with this particular ship we actually got introduced to some fairly significant stuff. The biggest thing we have here is a new classification of ship, which is now the Juggernaut classification. It's not a dreadnought, it's not a cruiser, but it's a Juggernaut. So it'll be interesting to see how Cryptic plays this out, and if we'll be getting more Juggernaut type ships in the future. But so far I like what I'm seeing from this one, that much I can at least say. Now, getting into some of our first thoughts on the build. I have to say I'm actually surprised that they gave us this caliber of a hybrid ship. Now, for those of you that may not be as familiar with some of the terminology of the game, basically if a ship is considered a hybrid, that means that it has access to two specialist seatings instead of just the one. In this case, we have access to Miracle Worker and Intel on the same ship. Then, I also have to say I wasn't expecting the caliber of hybrid that they gave us with this ship as well. But, you know, I'll take pleasant surprises like this all day long. Now, we're given a Commander Tactical / Miracle Worker and a Lieutenant Commander Tactical / Intel on the same ship. Now, for my veteran players, you're going to know what that means right away. But for some of my newer players out there, and folks that may not be as familiar with the terminology, basically this means we get access to Narrow Sensor Bands 3 and Override Subsystem Safeties 3 on the same ship. So if you play your cards right, as a damage dealer, that can be quite a big benefit to you. And if you play your cards right as a tank, that can be quite a big benefit to you as well in terms of threat gen. So definitely a lot of potential with this particular ship. Now, it also does come with a Juggernaut array. This is something that is unique to Juggernauts at the moment. For this particular one, it comes with a Polaron bolt, as it's called. It fires a Polaron bolt directly in front of the ship, deals a pretty sizable chunk of Polaron damage, and it also does have a fairly significant knockback. To give you an idea as to the significance of the knockback, in a couple of the runs that I've tested this in, I've been knocking Iconian, Idanian dreadnoughts around with this thing. And for those of you that have fought Iconians, you know how big those Idanian dreadnoughts are, so that's a pretty significant knockback. Then the Polaron damage is going to get buffed by anything that buffs your Polaron damage, so tactical consoles, tac powers, anything like that is going to buff this lance. Well, I call it a lance because that's just what I'm used to saying, but it's actually technically it's actually a bolt type of weapon. But anyway, that's one of the big things that we have with our Juggernaut at the moment. Now, this particular one, it also does, since it's technically a full-on Miracle Worker ship, we do get access to the Miracle Worker type effects. Now, the one here at the moment, if we activate 2 psi powers and an engineering power, we get the Heisenberg decoupling, which is a secondary shielding capacity for 10 seconds. So, that's one good thing we do have there. Now, as far as the ship itself, there is a downside that I saw to the ship that became apparent as I was setting it up. And it is a bit more of a nitpick than anything, but it is something that you're going to have to play around as a tank. And that's that this ship does not have access to cruiser commands. And personally, like I say, I understand why they did it, but I would have liked to have seen at least the attract fire and maybe the shield one on here, or the shield one and, say, the engines. At least 2 of the cruiser commands on here, but like I say, again, I understand why they did it, considering everything else they gave us on the ship. They didn't want to make it too overpowered, if that makes sense. But anyway, we'll get to that in just a minute. But the other thing that you got to kind of watch for is the inertia is a bit higher on this ship. So it is easy to power slide if you're not paying attention. But anyway, getting into some of the build that we have now. Like I say, I wanted to do this for my tanks to get you guys some information, and so maybe it'll give you guys some ideas for builds, and maybe you guys will give me some ideas too. Just kind of have to see. But for this particular build of the ship, I wanted to test it out since this is a brand new classification of ships, and see just what all these juggernauts are capable of. So since our Polaron weapon, or our Juggernaut array, is based in Polaron, I figured why not go with Polaron for this particular build. Now as far as the layout of the ship, it's a 5-3 weapons layout. You have a 4 engineering, 2 science, 5 tactical, and then of course the 1 universal seat that does come with a miracle worker type vessel. As far as our masteries go, this is the Juggernaut package. We get the devastating weaponry for some critical chance. We get enhanced weapon banks for the severity. Rapid repairs for the bit quicker repairs. And then we also have the enhanced weapon systems, which is a free 10% category 1 kinetic and energy damage. And then of course we have the trait, which is the weapon emitter overdrive that we can unlock. And when using a beam or cannon ability, bridge officer power, for 20 seconds we increase the weapon power drain, or weapon power drained by weapons by 50%. We get a 10% critical chance to direct in energy weapons and a plus 50 accuracy. Now the downside there is the increased power drain, but it kind of makes sense. Now if you're somebody that's using the emergency weapon cycle, basically what's going to happen there is if you're using this with emergency weapon cycle, the emergency weapon cycle is going to decrease the power drain by 50%. This is going to increase it. So basically those two effects are going to wash each other out and equalize. You will, however, still get your haste, and you will get your critical chance increase from this. So you are at least going to get that much. You just won't have the power drain effects reduced if you're using both traits. But anyways, that's kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Now as far as our weapons go, we've got 4 of the DMG-4 Polaron beam arrays at the moment. That's what we had on the ship. We've got 2 of them in the back, 3 of them in the front. We also have our advanced piezo beam from our Lucari rep. We've also hit tier 6, so we're getting a slight category 2 bonus there. And one of the guys there. Checking on me to see if I was recording, but let him know right quick. But anyways, continuing on. We have our morphogenic console in the front, or not console, morphogenic torpedo in the front, and that is going to be buffed by Polaron damage. But we have that. Then we also have our morphogenic Omni turret in the back here. I call it an Omni turret because it functions as an Omni beam or a turret depending on what firing mode you've activated first. So if you activate a scatter volley or a rapid fire, it'll fire like a turret. If you activate a fire at will or an overload, it'll fire like a beam. So that's why I call it the Omni turret. But that's going to round out our weapons and give us that sort of thing. So for our weapons, you can see we're going for heavy Polaron in this instance. Now there are some of the other Polaron weapons I've not actually thrown on here just yet, but this is just sort of a preliminary build. I may do a more intense build in the future if you guys want to see that for this particular ship, where we try to break it with as much Polaron stuff as we can. But in the meantime, since we're going for more of a higher end build, I wanted to utilize the Kobali set on here. For those of you that are viewers of my channel, you know that I love to use the Kobali set. I think it's one of the best, if not the best, ships in the game because of how potent it can be as far as the healing and damage reduction that it gives. Now, it doesn't give as much in terms of threat gen, but it's still got some decent bonuses. Now for our shields, you can see here, it buffs our incoming healing, which is part of why we're using it. It also has an all damage reduction to shields by 10%. So you've got the res all there, which is going to be good. That means no matter what energy type you face, you're going to have at least some damage reduction to it, which is going to help you out in the long run. Then we have our impulse engines, which anywhere from a 3% to a 10.5% recharge time reduction on hull and shield healing bridge officer powers. That's going to increase in effectiveness as the engine power increases. So these are hyper engines, so keep that in mind. Then we also have our Kobali deflector, which is a healing heavy deflector. Now, as far as deflectors go, I'm of the opinion that most deflectors are basically stat sticks, unless there's some kind of specialty effect added to them. Pretty much what you see is what you get, aside from any bonuses they may be tied into. And then lastly, we're looking at our warp core, because it comes off of the Samsar. It's an amp core, as you can see there. It's a field stabilizing core, so it works a lot off of shield power. Then you've got a bit of extra hull healing baked into the core. You've got the shield power and the aux power as a thing that we have there. So it's a baked-in S to W, or no, that would be an S to A. In this instance, I'm getting my terminology confused a little bit. A slight reduction on our slipstream, and then you see our amp effect, and then we have the W to S that goes along with our core once we get it to epic. For our set bonuses with the Kobali set, this is the reason I like to call on the Kobali set for tanking quite a bit, is because of the set bonuses that it gives you, more so the 4-piece than anything else. The 2-set and 3-set aren't the strongest, and if you're not going to be utilizing the full 4-piece Kobali set, or if you're not going to have access to it, then there's other sets I would recommend you guys consider, if you're looking for pure healing potential, that is. Because if you're not using the full 4-piece, I'm of the opinion that the Kobali set is going to get outclassed very quickly in terms of healing potential if you're not using the 4-piece. But anyways, that's kind of a side tangent. But anyway, as far as the 2-set goes, it gives a 20% hull regen, or increase to hull regen, and that's going to increase as our HP dips lower. Then we also have a temporary health effect. We get 50, or no, not 50, I wish it was 50, 15,000 temporary hit points for 15 seconds, and that can occur once every 2 minutes, once we're at 25% or lower. And then for our 4-piece, this is where the set actually shines, in my opinion, as far as its set bonuses go. Then it affects friend and self, so up to a maximum of 20 people potentially. It's in a 5-kilometer sphere for the healing, a 2-minute recharge, and to you and nearby allies for 15 seconds, you gain 20% of incoming energy damage as healing. This can trigger up to 20 times a second. It will always heal you for a minimum of 100 and for a maximum of 20,000. So there is a slight cap that's going on with this particular set, but it's still very potent in terms of healing. Assuming you get the minimum amount of healing versus the maximum amount of healing. We calculated this out, and you're looking at about potentially 6 million points of healing that you could potentially receive from the 4-piece. And a minimum of, I believe it was about 400,000 points of healing. So this is pretty much an extra life for your ship if you play your cards right. And it can combo very nicely with other healing powers. So in a pinch, if you need this, this is your best friend if you're using the Kobali set. Now, if you're using the Kobali set, the other things you have to draw on too, and I waited to mention these last, is you're going to have access to the shield capacitor on the warp core. And that's going to be a nice shield heal for you and nearby allies. You get close to them, you pop it, you're going to heal at least 10,000 points of shield healing, as well as grant a shield battery effect. So that's going to be pretty potent. And then you also have your regenerative integrity field. As we get into our consoles, we'll go ahead and start with engineering. You get a 28.5% hull healing bonus, which is actually pretty substantial. Then you get the regenerative integrity field. It gives a nice burst healing, and that's going to increase the amount of burst healing you get as your HP dips lower, so you'll get more than that 12,000 on the tooltip. Receive 100% of your directed energy damage as healing for 10 seconds. It can trigger up to 5 times a second. It will heal you for a minimum of 558.5 or for a maximum of 4467.9. So that is something to keep in mind. There is a slight cap there. As long as you're firing, you're going to be healing. And if you're interested, it also does tie into the command ship bonuses, if you're somebody that likes to mess around with set bonuses like that. Then, some other staple consoles that we use quite a bit. We have our tachyokinetic converter. It gives a bit of control expertise, as well as flight turn rate, critical chance, and critical severity. So it's basically an RCS accelerator and an assimilated module from Omega Rep slammed into one console. Then we also have our bioneural infusion circuits, also from Low-Bi. This is going to give a nice bit of hull cap, a bit of control expertise, and the biggest thing is 26.2% critical severity. This is still, I believe, at least at the time of recording this, they may bring something out nastier in the future, but at the moment, this means that you have 26.2% critical severity on one console. That is still the most amount of crit chance or crit severity off of a single console in the game at the moment. Next thing we have from our Lucari rep is our piezoelectric focuser. This gives 39.4% plasma and polaron damage, with plasma being the alternate energy type for the Lucari rep. You also get 15% flight turn rate and 19.7% maximum shield cap. So you're actually getting a pretty nice amount of shield capacity increase based off of this. And then it gives a nice Category 1 damage bonus, as well as a bit of turn rate. So this one is kind of an amalgamation of 3 consoles in a way. It's a field generator, an RCS, and a tactical console kind of slammed into one universal thing. So this is basically going to function as a free tactical console of sorts, and a buff to our shields is the main things. Then for our science consoles, we have our temporal disentanglement suite. This is a console I like to have. It gives some nice buffs all around the board, I think. Gives a bit of aux power. Gives 26.2% maximum shield cap, so extra shield capacity is nice. Anywhere from 2.5% maximum down to 0 crit chance. Anywhere from 0 to 10% crit severity, based on both of those based on aux power, and then a 3% shield resistance. So it's going to buff your threat gen, it's going to give you some extra shield cap, and it's going to give you some damage reduction at the same time. So an all-around great console to have on virtually any ship, in my opinion. Then comes a console that we're going to save for last, and we'll look at our last two, and I'll explain why I have them in a minute, because I know some people are going to see these and wonder, why the heck does he have that on there? So our tactical consoles, we'll touch base on those because they're really easy to explain. Our tactical consoles, we have 4 of the vulnerability locators for Polaron. These are going to give us our Polaron damage and our 2% critical chance per console. And our 5th one is the morphogenic matrix controller, if I get words today. And then it's going to give some drain expertise, it's going to increase our Polaron damage, gives additional weapon damage versus foes in the rear arc, so very great for raider type ships, and gives a 10% weapon power cost reduction. So that is something very nice there, and it's also going to round out our morphogenic 3-piece. So let's touch base on the 3-piece, and then I'll explain the last 2 consoles and why they're there. So for our set bonuses, we have our 2-piece, which is a 15% recharge time reduction to basically all of the tactical and firing mode enhancements, such as for mines, torpedoes, beams, and cannons. Then we also have, in this instance, depending on whether you activate a cannon enhancement, a beam enhancement, or a torpedo or mine enhancement, you'll get one of the following buffs. If it's fire at will or overload, you get a 2% critical chance buff up to a maximum of 6, so it can stack up to 3 times. If you activate Scatter Volley or Rapid Fire, you get 10% critical severity. If you activate Torpedo Spread or High Yield, you get 7.5% Category 1 weapon damage. So you get additional stuff there. Now, getting into our last couple of consoles, because I know some people are going to wonder, why do I have this on the ship? Now, we have a plasma generating weapon signature amplifier from the Embassy. I know there's probably going to be some people out there that are going to be wondering, oh my god, why does he have that? Oh my god, why is he using that? Those things are garbage. And for the most part, it's sad to say they've been nerfed into the ground. That much I can agree with. But since we don't have attract fire, this is something that you can use to make up for the threat loss, without having to slot a third copy of a Dakukan as your duty officer. Now, in this particular instance, we're using this console mainly for its threat boosting properties. Now, just by having this on the ship, I'm guaranteed that I'm going to have 157.5% additional threat gen while it's on the ship. Then it gives me a bit of exotic particle gens as well, and then obviously the old plasma explosions that people are familiar with. The main reason we're going to have this on here is for the threat gens. That's going to make up for our loss of attract fire. Otherwise, to be honest, I would not have this on the ship. So in this case, it's sort of a band-aid solution because we don't have one of the abilities we're used to working with. So you got to kind of play around with it a little bit. Then in our universal seat, we have our supercharged SIF conduits, which actually comes with the ship. You get an additional passive polar-on boost and hull regen, and for 20 seconds you get a plus 50 all damage resistance rating. Once per second when damaged, we get a 15% energy damage increase, flight speed turn rate, or flight speed and flight turn rate for those 5 seconds, and it reduces the recharge time of the Juggernaut array by 1 second, and it's on a 2-minute recharge. So you're looking at potentially up to a 20%, or not 20%, a 20-second cooldown reduction on our Juggernaut array, which is actually a pretty big deal. So you've got some pretty potent consoles to work with here as far as your gear goes. Now, as far as our skills go, now I'm using a slightly modified version of the usual skill build that I have been using, and that's because on this character I usually get pigeonholed into cruisers and the heavier ships a lot. Not that I mind tanking and everything, but you see for our lieutenant level skills here, whatnot. Now it's a 16 engineering, 12 science, 18 tactical skill trees points spent. Now I'm not going to get into all of why I picked certain skills because we'd be here for another hour possibly if I was to explain all the technical ramifications. But for those people that are interested, I'll get you guys a video in the very near future explaining some of the technical aspects of why I went with what I did. You can see our lieutenant and our lieutenant commander level skills. Now the changes that I had made is I put some extra points in impulse expertise, mainly because that let me shift some stuff around because I wasn't using my EPG that much. And then we have our commander and then our captain level skills and then our admiral level skills. Now I will mention that our 2-set bonus for recharge time reduction will stack with our tactical readiness and our skill tree. So that's potentially a 32% recharge reduction on our tactical powers, as long as we keep that going. Then, as far as all of the unlocks here at the bottom, there's really only one that I consider mandatory for a tank, and that is the threat control, because that is an additional 100% threat gen while you're in threatening stance. So that is free threat gen to you. For our specializations, I went with Intel Primary and our Strategist Secondary. We went with Intel Primary to give a bit of extra threat gen. It also gives some decent defense rating. Then we also have our Strategist for some of the benefits that it gives as far as temporary HP, as well as the AoE taunt type of effect. Now, another option you could consider in this area is perhaps Miracle Worker. if you think you want a little bit of extra healing potential. So you've got options that you can use here. As far as our traits, we'll touch base on those really quickly, then we'll look at our bridge officer powers, and we'll move on to our actual runs. First off, we have a good day to die. That's going to let us use our go down fighting at any hull strength. This is pretty much a must-have for a lot of tactical players, pretty much all tactical players. So it gives you a nice ability to use whenever you need. Beam barrage for the free beam damage from our R&D crafting school. I always like to assume you've picked one crafting school to level and you've taken its trait, usually. In this case, we assume beams. We also have context is for kings, which is going to give us a damage reduction or some category 2 bonuses. Then we also have our fleet coordinator for free damage based on how many people are on your team. Minimum of 2%, maximum of 10%. Then we have the helmsman for the 10% flight turn rate, as well as the cooldown reduction to evasive maneuvers. Last ditch effort, which gives us a bit of damage resistance when go down fighting is active. Point blank shot for some free category 2 damage based on how close we are to the target, up to a certain maximum. Redirected armor plating for some damage resistance if we get shot from behind or on the sides. Repair crews for some extra damage reduction and hull repair rate. And then finally, our beam training. I was able to get the superior version of this, otherwise this is going to be a 5% Cat 2 bonus for you. And I see one little thing that I actually forgot to do is I was recording some other stuff and I forgot to change that all hands on deck back to the weapon system synergy. But I'll go ahead and fix that back, or weapon emitter overdrive, I mean. I can't think of names today, folks. It's one of those days. But anyway, starship traits. We have our redirecting arrays, which is going to give us some extra uptime on our fall as long as we're getting hit. Then we have our attack pattern Delta Prime, which is going to give some crit chance and severity based on, or while our attack pattern Delta is active. So that can stack up to 10 times, so potentially a lot of severity and a lot of crit chance. Then we have our weapon emitter overdrive, which I was testing out for this build. And then we have our, basically that was the one I said a second ago, gives the increased power drain, the 10% chance to directed weapons, and 50 accuracy. Now you can use all hands on deck here if you want to. I just wanted to test it out for this particular build. Then we have our emergency weapon cycle. Whenever we activate emergency powered weapons, we get a power cost reduction and the 20% firing cycle haste for 30 seconds. Then finally we have our history will remember. This is going to give us a stack of all damage, hull regen, a bit of extra hull capacity, and 10% threat generation while we're in threatening stance. So that is potentially up to a 300% additional threat gen that you can get off of this particular trait each time an new enemy shoots you for the first time. And you keep it as long as you stay on the map. So it's pretty potent. For our space reps, we have our standard rep abilities. We've got our precision for the critical chance, advanced target systems for the severity. We've been getting some pretty good healing out of energy refrequencer now that it's been buffed back up again a little bit. Then we have our aux power offense, and then finally magnified firepower for the static Cat 2 bonus. Finally, for our active space reps, we have our quantum singularity manipulation to increase our science stats and give the temporary cloak effect. Our anti-time entanglement singularity, which is a nice AoE physical damage and slow to enemies, can be buffed by other exotic abilities such as quantum singularity manipulation or other stuff. Then we also have our biomolecular shield generator, which is going to give a bit of shield regen boost as well as shield damage resistance. So, very nice stuff. Now, touching base on our bridge officer powers. And I realize this intro is going a lot longer than what I expected, but there's a lot to explain with this particular ship, because it's a bit different than what we might normally use. Then, for our layout, our bridge officer layout, we'll start with our easier to explain powers. We'll start with our psi powers. We have our science team for recharging the shields and purging science debuffs. We have our hazard emitters for the heal over time effect, as well as damage reduction that it gives, and purging certain debuffs like the Borg plasma fires. For our Lieutenant Commander Engineering Station, we have an emergency to engines 1, which is a nice little, nice little boost to the engines when we need to get somewhere really quick. We have our reverse shield polarity to recharge our shields in a pinch based off of incoming damage. We have our emergency power to weapons 3, which is going to buff our energy weapon damage for the duration, as well as triggering certain effects. Then we also have our last engineering power, which is what we made our Ensign Universal seat, which is our Engineering Team 1, which is going to heal our hull and purge certain things like the viral matrix. So that's what we have there. Then finally we get into our tactical powers and our specialist seating. Now, for this particular seat, we have our Commander Tactical / Miracle Worker. Now, I went with a Tactical Team 1, a Beamfire at Will 2, so instead of going with Fall 3, I went with a Fall 2. And then we have our Narrow Sensor Bands 3, which is anywhere from a 20% to a 50% Category 2 weapon damage bonus, and just depends on how close we are to the target. Then we also have our Attack Pattern Delta 3. Our Delta is going to debuff enemy damage resistance as well as buff ours whenever we get shot while this is active. So that's what we have there for this particular thing. Now for this particular seat, I could have gone with a Narrow Sensor Bands 3 or Narrow Sensor Bands 2 and then a Thaw 3, but I felt for the way I like it, I seem to think that I get more threat out of just going with Fall 2 and then a Narrow Sensor Bands 3 with the way I've been going. Some people may prefer the other way around, and that's perfectly fine. That's just the way I chose to do it for this particular build. Then finally, for our tactical Lieutenant Commander Tac / Intel, we have our Torp Spread to throw our torps around, our Scatter Volley to let us cheese the Morphogenic set, and then finally we have our Override Subsystem Safeties 3. This is going to allow us to tap into some of that overcapped power that we normally may not be able to utilize as much as we would like. Now, the big thing here is you're going to want to try to save, at least in my opinion, for tanks, you're going to want to save your Override Subsystem Safeties 3 and also your Narrow Sensor Bands, and if you play your cards right and combo those together, you can make a very nice burst of damage for threat gen, or for whenever you just want something dead. It just really depends. Like I say, it kind of depends on your situation as to what you're going to want to do. Anyways, if I could buttons worth a crap today, here we go. Touch base on our DOFs, and then we'll get into our runs. Now we're using 2 of the crit severity DOFs here. These are the blue ones that give crit severity when we fire our energy weapons. ZMOC to cool down our attack pattern Delta a little faster. Our Con Officer, whenever we activate emergency to engines, it's going to cool down our evasive maneuvers a little faster. And then finally we have 2 copies of Adaku Con for extra threat gen when our attack pattern Delta is active. So I hope you guys can kind of see what we're doing here, what we're going for. As far as your devices, I do think those are personal preference, which is why I don't always go over them. Some examples of devices you might like is the Temporal Negotiator if you have access to it, the Red Matter Capacitor when that rolls around again, and finally we also have our energy amplifiers and subspace field modulators. But anyways guys, I hope you can kind of see what we're going for here. It is kind of a standard fall tank, so to speak, but for this particular build, for this particular ship, like I said, I just kind of wanted to see what it could do for you guys and go from there, really. But anyways, we're going to take a brief intermission. We're going to come back. We're going to hit up our Beta Thoradar and our Japori, and then we're going to give some final thoughts on the ship. But we will be right back.
Okay. Well, we're back, guys. And welcome Blade in.
Giggity.
So where he's testing this ship as a tank, I'm testing it, obviously, as I said, for damage output. Had to deal with some packet loss issues that we're seeing. Don't know what caused it, but we gotta fix it. Doesn't matter. Let's see how this thing can do. It's the Klingons.
Technology is fickle sometimes.
But one thing I do want to go over, and I know this will be a slight irritation for some people watching, because the Vaadwaur use Polarized. Why aren't you using Polarized? Well, I would love to. And I've already talked to Blade about this, with my irritation with how the Bridge Officer powers share cooldowns. Currently, Exceeded Rated Limits shares a cooldown with both your cannon abilities, like Rapid Fire and Scatter Volley, and your beam abilities. So the problem that I'm facing is if I was to run Polaron, like I'm used to everywhere else with the morphogenic 3-piece and everything else, I will not be able to effectively, while using Exceeded Rated Limits as my primary enhancement, be able to get all the other good bonuses out of it, because it's going to put any beam overload or scatter volley for the other two set bonuses on cooldown. It's going to make it a lot more wonky, where it's not going to work properly. Wonky is an industry term, if you're not familiar. But it's just not going to work as fluidly as it would if you're just doing standard fire at will. So, Polaron will show up when we're doing fire at will review and the scatter volley review. But for Exceeded Rated Limits, it's just not going to work nearly as well. And it's just an irritation I have because they share a cooldown. And I get why. But at the same time, it kind of hurts potentiality for, especially the morphogenic set. Which I don't know if you've tested that yet on your own ships and seen it, Blade.
I know for me, like I say, right now I'm using morphogenic on here. Oh god.
Oh Jesus.
Well,
it's alright, I can stay alive.
It was my own stupid fault.
I'm single target,
Distracted
so it's
messing
good.
with the sound setting. Okay, so minor hiccup there. But what I was going to say before I was rudely interrupted by these Vaadwaur, as far as potentiality of the ship goes, like I say, I'm using Polaron on here at the moment. It's doing fairly decent. The one thing for me that I don't really care for on the ship, and again I kind of understand why they did it this way, is I don't have cruiser commands. So that means I don't have attract fire, which for me of course means that I'm missing a tiny little bit of damage resistance and a little bit of threat gen that I would normally have. So I'm going to have to make up for that elsewhere. But so that means in this case, and I know my guys will have seen this in the intro of the video, and you guys will, I guess, be seeing it later, is I'm actually having to run an embassy console again, just for the threat gen. So it's one little console. I don't see it as that ship breaking, I guess would be the proper term here.
Yeah, it's another good industry term.
Yep, they're definitely industry terms for swear people. Yeah. But overall, I like what I'm seeing so far.
Definitely gives you some options. That much is for certain. And for those of you that are watching, and I've had this come up on the channel once or twice now, those green swirls that are going around my ship. That is from Energy Refrequencer. I've had a lot of people ask me about that when they're not used to seeing that ability. That is from Energy Refrequencer, from the Iconian rep. That is a hull heal that is based on your outgoing damage. A percentage of it is done as a hull heal, and based on your hull healing skill points and skill bonuses will determine how much of that percentage of outgoing damage is a heal and the max cap for each activation of it. So if you've got a good balance of hull healing in your ship, Energy Frequencer can work pretty well, but that's the actual animation you see, is that swirling green around the starship. I mean, that worked pretty well. Let's go do our Japori Elite and let's do a parse, see what happens, Blade.
Alrighty, we'll be right back.
And now time for more epic loading screens. Trying to do our Japori Elite. You gotta love triple server loading screens.
Don't you though?
I mean, you know, the same server essentially, but 10 times the wait time of loading.
Certainly feels that way sometimes.
It does. It honestly does. So the parser's ready. We're gonna see what Japori Elite, how this parse goes. So this time, try not to die, sir.
Well, like I said, it was my own fault, and you guys will see that. I was playing with sound settings.
These giant whales into combat.
Whales is an understatement.
Alright. Let's get some. Hey, battleship. Deal with it.
Oh, a battleship. That's cute. Find him halfway across the map.
Now, even regardless of how good or indifferent Exceed Ray Limits does, I do feel, and this is just me, I do feel that there should be something to enhance Exceed Ray Limits. One of the few energy type enhancements that does not have an ability that, you know, has a timer enhancement or a damage enhancement of some kind. Especially if it's going to share a lockout with Fire at Will and with Scatter Volley and all of that, it should have something to enhance its timer or damage output or something. It should have something. What I don't know, but to me it just makes most sense.
I wouldn't complain to see it get a little something. I don't know that it needs the hugest enhancement ever, and I, of course, am not saying that it does, but...
I mean, it doesn't have to be game-breaking or anything, but I mean, you've got timer enhancements on Scatter Volley and Rapid Fire and Beam Fire. You've got damage enhancements. I mean, there's a lot of things working for those beam and cannon enhancements, and I do feel there should be something for this particular one. It's a very good one. It should have something to boost it a little bit.
I can definitely agree with that assessment, even if it's, say, like a 5% cap one. Like, I wouldn't think that would be too crazy, because you don't want it to be too crazy, obviously, because of what you've got now. You've got your, what do you call it? You've got your very big firing cycle haste bonus already, so it's not like you've got a bad power, it's just... I guess what I'm trying to say is basically it's like if you're, I guess, decorating a room or something, it needs just that one little extra thing to make it feel complete, if you know what I'm saying. And I would say maybe like a very minor 5% category 1 boost.
I mean, Fire at Will gets target environment. There's a 30%, up to 30%. Category 1 with target environment for Beam Fire at Will and for Scatter Volley. a 10% would not be out of the realm of the ordinary to ask for, to be honest.
For me, though, I don't know that I would go a full 10%. I would say maybe 7.5%.
I mean, maybe.
Because to me, being able to basically double your firing cycle based off of that, the 100% is a very huge enough bonus. And to me, the extra little bit of Cat 1 would just be a nice little, I guess, the cherry on top of the ice cream sundae, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm saying like a 5% Cat 2 or 10% Cat 1 to me would be nice. It's just one of those things. If you get everything for all the other ones, we even have stuff for like transport warhead and surgical strikes. I mean, surgical strikes has one or two that enhances it. So to have one that helps out this particular enhancement, I think it'd be welcome. Now, I don't know how you'd want to introduce it or what it would be, but I feel it would be a welcome addition. Okay, so that's actually comparable to what my normal, dare I say, fire at will builds. Just shy of 121k in 4 minutes in Japori Elite, with Blade getting 57.
It's not too terribly
That's
bad.
about, I mean, with what we've been doing, 120 to 140 is about what I'll be getting, I think, with Fire at Will. I'd have to look, but I think 120-ish is about the norm. It's single target, but, you know, if I'm getting comparable to Fire at Will in some instances, that's not bad. I've got crit damage percent chance of 51.6%. That's very high. But the good thing is Blade's got 75% of the damage in with 81% of the attacks. Took a lot of the attacks for me. So thank you.
I'll take that.
But the good things we're going over is the spiral beams, because of all the firing cycle haste, did 55k on their own, with the Terran Task Force doing another 19, and the Omni was doing another 11, Torpedoes did another 11.9, and the Noski did 11.5. Then I've got another listing for energy weapons, exceed rated limits 3, 1.6k. So, and I believe that is the damage it does to myself, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. I was counting the damage that I did to myself as part of it. It's only 1k, which is just a weird way to parse that. But all things considered, for something that resting is 28% crit chance, I'm doubling that with accelerated limits because of the amount of shots I'm doing. It's a really good thing. It's a really awesome thing. And I'm going to send Blade his parse because, let me officially look at him. 32k was his Polaron beams under fire at will too. And something that he got to use, the Juggernaut array. It didn't do hardly anything, but it had a decent 19k max one hit. Don't know what to tell you there. Oh, wait a minute. Let me check pets. That's where it is. One thing you'll note when you're looking at this ship, your Juggernaut array will show up under pets. So for him, his only pet was the Juggernaut array that did 1.4k DPS. He had one attack with it, and its max one hit was 330k. So the Juggernaut array hit for 330k, and he's using something that boosts Polaron. So,
yep.
I'm going to send this over to him so he can go over the tanking advantages of it, because I'm seeing some pretty nice, interesting things here on his part. So let's switch over while he's working on that. Let's switch over to cannons and get ready for running cannons with this enhancement. We'll be right back.
Alrighty guys, it's time for our final thoughts segment of our video, where we're going to be breaking down our parse data for those of you on my channel and giving some final thoughts on our ship and build. Now, let's go ahead and drag in our parse data from off screen here. I've already got it loaded into our combat meter. If it'll cooperate with me, there we go. Alright, so our resident Timberwolf was kind enough to send us the parse data, as he always does after the end of these runs. You can see we were in there for 4 minutes, 8 seconds, just a little over 4 minutes, a little bit longer than some of our other parses have gone. sometimes, but either way, not too terribly bad for a 4-minute run, I don't think, on Elite. Now, we've been using Archiporia Elite because that's what a lot of folks on console have been using to try to figure out their damage and where they're at in that aspect. Now, in terms of total damage and DPS, you can see Timber got 120.99k. You may as well say 121k. Then, for us, we had 57.54k, so we may as well round that off and say 57.5. So, not too terribly bad, I don't think, as far as the damage we were dealing over the 4-minute run. Then, to break down some of our preliminary data a little bit here, you can see maximum 1 hits. This is where it gets pretty interesting, and because of Timber not using Polaron, he didn't really test out the Juggernaut array that much in this run. That's something I took advantage of. Now, for his maximum 1 hit, he still had a very respectable 78,595, so 78.6k almost. And then we had 330,118 for our maximum 1 hit, so a little over 330k. And then that is because of our Juggernaut array. Then for our damage in and attacks in, those sorts of stats, this is where it gets interesting. For our total damage in, Timberwolf had 622,747. We had 1,942,666. So quite a bit more damage taken in this instance. But the good thing is we were able to survive, even with all of that damage coming at us. Now, in terms of total damage in, we had 75.73% of the damage in, and Timberwolf had 24.27%. So you may as well say he had 24% of the damage in, and we had 76% of the damage in. Somewhat of a similar breakdown in terms of total attacks in. Timberwolf had 18.24%, we had 81.76%, so you may as well say we had 82% of the attacks in, and he had 18, which is still quite a bit. That means we had over 75% of the attacks in, basically meaning at least 3 out of every 4 attacks almost were hitting us or flying in our general direction. So we had over 3/4 of the attacks coming after us, which means we were holding threat and doing what we needed to do as a tank. So that's some of what we had going on for that. Let's go ahead and we will bring up our combat analysis reports. Give this just a second to load there. Alright, so for this particular run, Timber was testing out disruptors and going on a theory for his particular version of the build. You guys will get to see that on his channel as well and be able to get some ideas as to what he was doing there and a little bit better breakdown. Now, let's go ahead and swap over to our stuff. So, for our damage breakdown, we can kind of see how everything is here. Now, for our first and highest damage dealing thing, we had our Polaron Beam Array under Fire at Will 2 dealing 32,756.37 DPS. So that was our highest damaging ability by far, was our beams under Fall. And we had our just a standard Polaron Array right under that, which was dealing 8k. Our Piezo Beam dealing 6k under Fire at Will 2. Then we had our Morphogenic at 4,800 DPS. Then we have the advanced Piezo Beam, or no, the one before that was the Energy Torp. I was reading the wrong line there. Then we have our Piezo Beam, which was dealing 2,200. Then we have our Pets, which it was saying was dealing 1,422. And then this is where our maximum 1 hit came from. Now, one thing we have noted on the parser is that for some reason at the moment it's actually registering the Juggernaut array as a pet, even though it actually says Juggernaut array down here. we've actually been able to determine through some bits of testing that it's actually considering the Juggernaut array as a pet. But anyways, I'm sure the guys that work on the parser will have that fixed pretty quick. They're usually pretty fast about getting that kind of stuff taken care of. But anyways, that's the one little thing I did want to mention here. So you can see that's where our Juggernaut array is at. Now for this particular build, I was actually surprised that we had our Plasma Explosion console. It dealt 179 DPS, which is actually not as bad as I was expecting for the console to do. Because, like I say, you know, the Plasma Explosions that were nerfed quite a bit early on, but we had it more for our threat gen there than we did anything else. So that's not too bad. I'd love to see better, but anyway, that's another debate for another day. Alright, let's break down our healing powers and see where we stand with that stuff. Alright, so our energy refrequencer at rank 2 was healing for 1330 healing per second. Then we had a healing ticks. We had 538 ticks off of it. Then the next highest heal we had was our regenerative integrity field. That is the console from the Samsar. Now, even though sometimes we may not use the Kobali set, in this case obviously we did, but I like to have this on the ships just in case, because it does buff our healing a little bit. But anyway, you can see we have 1147 total healing per second. Then we have our improved proto-matter regenerative influx. That I want to believe that's the ability that comes off of the piezo beam, but I can't remember off the top of my head all of the little names that they have. Then we have our Kobali shield capacitor. You can see there just some of the healing it was giving, but I say that's what we've got as far as our breakdown of damage and healing. You can see we've got quite a bit of tools to work with on the ship. Let's go ahead and I'll move this back off screen. Okay, so final thoughts on the ship itself. Now, I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised by this ship. From everything in the blog that we were seeing, I was expecting some pretty good stuff from this ship, and so far it has delivered, and then some. Now, the one thing that I don't really care for the ship, though I understand why they did it the way they did, is we don't have access to any cruiser commands. Now, normally for some types of ships like this, especially the dreadnoughts, like the Galaxy X being one example, we typically at least have one or two cruiser commands. With the Galaxy X, we at least have the shield command, and then we usually have the attract fire. So the downside, like I was saying in the intro, is that we don't have access to attract fire, so we've got to kind of make that up a little bit. And that's why we had our Plasma Explosion console on here, because of the stat increases that it gives for threat gen. So that's kind of why we had that there. And then the other downside you have too is that you don't get the extra damage reduction that could come with attract fire. So that's the real downsides that I see to the ship. But again, I can kind of understand why they didn't give us the command arrays. I would have liked to have seen at least attract fire in the shield ones. But, you know, that's kind of really more of a nitpick than anything else at this point. But still, if I had to pick a gripe with the ship, that would be the big one. And the other thing is the inertia on this ship. That's the only other real big thing, is you do tend to power slide quite a bit if you're not careful, so it can take a little bit of a learning curve to get used to it, but once you do that, you're good to go. Like I say, that's really my only major gripes with the ship, and those are really nitpicks more than anything. But let's get into some of the good with the ship. Like I was saying, overall, it performed really well, and it did what I was looking for it to do. As far as the ship goes, it let me hold threat. It gives us some extra tools that we could play with that we might not have normally had access to. I have to say, the ability to get a narrow sensor bands 3 and an OSS 3 on the same ship, that's a really big deal, and not something that I thought we were going to see for quite some time, if ever. So that was a pleasant surprise. And not only that, but we can also get a rank 3 version of our attack power. So in this case, we've got a rank 3 version of attack pattern delta. So you've got quite a bit of stuff you could play with in the toolkit here. And this is just one way of building the ship. Now there's other ways out there, other setups you can use, other ways you can organize your bridge officer powers, but if you didn't want to use OSS 3, maybe you could say, I don't know, maybe you could do OSS 2, Flaw 3, or however you wanted to set it up. But you've got quite a bit of flexibility with a setup like this. Your stations, like we were saying, you've got the Commander Tactical / Miracle Worker, and then you've got a Lieutenant Commander Tactical / Intel. That gives you quite a bit of tactical powers you can put on the build, and also quite a bit of specialist powers that you can call on as well. So you've got a good arsenal to play with in this ship. But overall, like I say, that's some of the things that I like about the ship. Now, the Juggernaut array, if you're not used to the ship, one thing I will say about that is it can be a little finicky to get your aiming exactly right because it doesn't behave per se like a lance, even though it's what I would consider similar to lance weaponry, if that makes sense to you guys out there. But yeah, and then you've got overall the Miracle Worker type effects where you fill out the requirements and then you get a certain effect. Like right now, the one that's up, if we activate 3 science powers, we would get the Ingenious Solutions, which would recharge our bridge officer abilities by 33%. And like I say, that's going to vary from moment to moment and so on and so forth. But overall, what I would give this ship for tanking, I would definitely give this an A+. Well, I'm actually going to say an A-, and that's only because it doesn't have a tracked fire, which, again, I understand why they did that, but it's really more of a nitpick, like I've said. But if I had to pick something, that would be it. So I would give it overall an A- on the ship. But overall, a great ship. If you guys are able to get one, definitely check it out. I don't think you guys are going to be disappointed if you decide to fly it, and especially if you're a fan of bigger ships. And since we now have the classification of Juggernaut in the game, maybe they're going to give us some more ships down the road. It'll be interesting to see where they go with this. But for now, folks, this is Captain Blade J52, signing off.